Welcome to Town Hall Live. My name is Michael A. Charbon. I'm joined by the leader of the Ontario Progressive Conservatives, Mr. Patrick Brown, and we're going to take your questions in the next 1 hour. Thank you so much, Mr. Brown, for joining us today.
Well, it's great to be back on your show, and I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you once again. Just to give a lay of the land now, there's 107 seats in the provincial legislature, of which currently 57 are occupied by the Liberals. The Conservatives occupy 29 and the NDP 20. Currently, with the facts and figures, Forum Research just did a poll recently and say you're about 40%. If we were going to hold an election today, the Conservatives would be able to hold 40% of the electoral vote. Liberals are in the low teens, and the NDP potentially, with somewhere in the 30s, would be the opposition. If today you were given the reins of Ontario, are there two things that you can pinpoint that you would want to change and introduce first and foremost?
Well, if I was elected, the first thing I do the next morning, and I have my 4 pillars of economic development on investing in infrastructure, cutting red tape, affordable energy, and addressing the skills mismatch. The one that I want to really sink my teeth into first, though, is the energy issue. Right now, as opposition, we don't have access to the bad contracts. Kathleen Wynne and her government is hiding these bad energy deals where we've signed so much surplus generation that our own water power we're spilling each day. We signed so many bad foreign contracts that we're giving it away at a loss or for free to Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, New York. What I want to do is look at those bad contracts. Do we have exit clauses? Do we have opportunities to mitigate some of this? The only copy that we've actually seen, the Samsung deal, there was an exit clause for $1.5 billion, $1.5 billion that we could have got out of. But instead of getting out of it, the government didn't want to walk away from their Green Energy Act, otherwise known as the Bad Contracts Act. So they blew $1.5 billion. I want to see the other contracts. Something smells here, Michael. You know, of those 30 mega deals, the government got $1.3 million in donations. 30 mega deals. We're charging Ontarians on your hydro bill. We're giving it away to our competitors in the U.S. It's offensive, and I want to look at those deals the first thing I do if I was Premier.
Well, the ticket is $1 billion a month, Patrick. We're paying $1 billion a month in Ontario.
In interest.
Yes, in interest alone. We're $308 billion in debt. One of those questions, we encourage you to go to Town Hall Live. That's Facebook at Town Hall Live. And submit your questions, and we will, and your comments as well. And let's grab our first few right here. Kevin Brown, all federal Conservatives are against a carbon tax. Like O'Leary says, if he wins, that no carbon tax even says no such thing as a revenue neutral. What's your position on carbon tax?
Well, first of all, I do believe that climate change is a threat and that every government has an obligation to do its part and to confront it. Where I disagree with Kathleen Wynne's approach is that she's going to collect $2 billion a year under this cap and trade, taking advantage of people's goodwill and environment. If it was really about the environment, why does government need to get $2 billion? So I would dismantle cap and trade. Justin Trudeau is saying that every province has to have a carbon price under the National Climate Accord. And if that's the federal obligation, then whatever we're forced to collect, I will give back to the people in broad-based tax relief. I don't believe this should be a revenue grab for the government of Ontario. And unfortunately, that's what Kathleen Wynne has created. And it's worse, Michael. Under Kathleen Wynne's cap and trade, we actually have to buy green credits from those who are participants of the Western Climate Initiative.
Yeah.
So by 2020, we're
buck up our level, right?
Yeah. So by 2020, we have to buy $200 million in green credits from Quebec and California. By 2030, over $2 billion in green credits. So it's bad enough we've got a Green Energy Act where we're sending surplus electricity to the northern U.S. Now we're going to be subsidizing Beverly Hills. I actually said in the legislature, Michael, I said to the
interesting quote.
Well, you know, I said to Kathleen, when everyone's talking about Donald Trump wanting to make America great, I'm sorry, it's not Donald Trump making America great. It's Kathleen Wynne. She's giving them billions in free electricity. Now she wants to send billions in green credits from California. I want to focus on Brampton and Timmins and Ottawa, small towns in Ontario, suburban Toronto that is struggling to keep jobs here, not subsidizing our competitors in the the U.S.
So we've got just under 200 viewers. It's coming more and more. We've got tons of questions, so I'm going to try and rattle these off. In 2014, Tim Hudak basically lost the election because he said he was going to cut 100,000 private sector jobs. It was supposed to be the big blue machine, and it didn't happen that way. The Liberals got in. Cody asks, I'm 18 years old. Why should I trust you?
Well, you're only as good as your action, how you conduct yourself. And Cody, I'd encourage you to follow me on social media and see the conversation, the dialogue, the issues that I'm pushing in Ontario. And I hope you have confidence with the way we're leading the party and the direction I'm hoping to take the province is one that's pragmatic and reasonable, focused on creating conditions in which we can create jobs in Ontario. And in terms of the last election, my approach would be different. I'm a big, and since we're in Brampton today, Michael,
Yep.
I'm a big believer in Bill Davis. Bill Davis, I think, is one of the finest premiers this province has ever had. I've certainly sought guidance from him on a regular basis as I've taken on this leadership role. And what I learned from former Premier Davis is that we're all in this together, that if we're going to see success for Ontario, it's going to be done in a collaborative fashion. And we're not going to be doing that by attacking one group or another. We're going to do this together. And I really believe that if we get things right for Ontario, this province can really succeed.
Patrick gives a question. We're homeschooling our children. Should we get a tax credit if it's a sacrifice? But how do we get double punishment for it? It's not fair. Anyways, keep up the good work. He wants to know about a tax credit if you homeschool. That's a tough question.
Now, I can appreciate your sacrifice. My mother really wanted me to go to St. Mike's High School in Toronto. It was a private school run by the Basilian Fathers, and my mother sacrificed. She sacrificed significantly so that I could go there. And if anyone would think that a tax credit for whether it's homeschooling or private schools would be appropriate, it might be me, but I don't. I think that debate's over. The province had a conversation on it in the 2007 provincial election. Remember, John Tory pushed this issue of school vouchers or credits. It was clearly rejected by Ontarians, and I have no interest in revisiting that issue.
That's why he lost the mayoral election for Toronto. Interesting.
Well, he won the mayoral election.
Well, I mean, that was the first time.
Yeah.
So speaking of John Tory, interesting. Tammy has a question here. And Tammy says, Tory and Stephen Del Duca seem to be at odds over transit funding. I don't know what the toll issue has come up again in Toronto. Needs improvement. That's a really pertinent. I mean, it was just on the news recently. What would you do if you became Premier of Ontario with regards to transit for Toronto, for Brampton, for Mississauga? I mean, this is the hub, right?
So there's two different issues there. First is tolls. I don't support tolls. I don't support putting tolls on roads that people have already paid for. If John Tory wanted to put tolls, and by the way, it wasn't John Tory, this was Kathleen Wynne telling John Tory you can go ahead with tolls, and then she pulled the rug out from underneath him. If you want tolls on roads that haven't been built, that's one conversation. I'm willing to have that. I'm willing to hear that pitch. But to put tolls on roads that people have already paid for is wrong. And frankly, it would have created a war of tolls. Why would Kathleen Wynne say to John Tory and say you can have tolls in Toronto, but you can't have them in Brampton or Mississauga? People who are commuting from the 905 into Toronto, that's not right to them. That's not fair. And so it was a hornet's nest that Kathleen Wynne opened.
Yep.
I'm glad that the government has finally said no to that. But in terms of infrastructure, we've got a real challenge here in the GTA. Gridlock is suffocating the GTA. It hurts productivity. It makes us less competitive. And I want to see a real commitment to infrastructure. Right now, it's more photo ops and insincere promises. You tell me an infrastructure promise that this government's made, and I'll tell you a promise that's been broken or delayed. Don't get me started. The Kitchener GO project delayed, the Niagara GO project delayed, the twinning of Highway 69 near Sudbury, what they promised during a by-election, delayed. The Scarborough subway extension, don't try to go on it. They promised it in two different by-elections, and it's no further ahead. This government's made infrastructure promises that are unfunded. And what I want to see the government do is make sure that the promises you make are actually honored. And when it comes to infrastructure, this government has said they're going to spend $160 billion. And I have to tell you, Michael, I am really concerned that it's not going to be spent appropriately. Every taxpayer dollar is precious. Every taxpayer dollar needs to be spent wisely. There needs to be transparency in how we spend it. And the Auditor General's report in December was scary. It was scary for every taxpayer hoping that there's appropriate use of taxpayer dollars at Queen's Park. You know, the Auditor General's report pointed out that on the 403, they were repaving roads every 2 years. Every 2 years instead of every 15 years. We had a case of a bridge where the rumor was the truss part of the bridge was upside down.
Yes.
The Auditor General made it very clear this government does not monitor results.
Well,
you know, there's cases they gave companies a contract to do a job. They didn't do the job. And you know what Kathleen Wynne's government did? They got a bonus and another contract.
Kevin O'Leary said that if the Liberal government was running a company that Kevin O'Leary had, they would have been fired.
Well, they'd be bankrupt before they could get fired.
Well, that's true. We want you to connect with us. You're watching Town Hall Live. My name is Michael A. Charbon with Patrick Brown, the leader of the Progressive Conservatives of Ontario. We're taking your questions. The Sunshine List just came out. 2004, there were 14,000 people who were on the Sunshine List, just almost 15,000 people. The increment was 100,000. Now, with inflation, etc., we can see a modest increase. We would understand that. There was over 123,000 people. The people of Ontario are pissed. We saw the money that's being paid to hydro people. We've seen the money that's being paid to bureaucrats. What would you do about out-of-control spending for people who work for the province?
It actually is worse than that 123,000 you spoke of. This year, Kathleen Wynne passed a law so that hydro workers for Hydro One are exempt. All those big...
Well, because they sold 30%, it's not a Crown Corporation anymore.
But you know what,
it's a private company.
Yeah, but here's
we know he's getting paid $4.8 million, something like that.
But they still have majority control. She said that they have majority shares, that they have a veto on major
what's
decisions.
too much pay? I mean, let's drill
let me
down.
give you some examples.
Mom and pop average, what is it, 35 grand supposedly minimum?
$4.5 million for Hydro One when we pay 400,000.
What's the scale, though? I mean, I understand you're outraged. There's more people out there that are much more angry than you and I. But what's
I'm
that
pretty
ceiling?
angry about it.
But what's the ceiling?
Well, here's the thing. Look at the rest. Look at the rest of the provinces. Look what competitive pay is. And the point I made to Kathleen Wynne in the legislature is, and the issue was this $4.8 million or $4.5 million salary for Hydro One that she signed off on. What I pointed to Kathleen Wynne, if it's 400,000 in BC, 400,000 in Quebec, 400,000 Manitoba, why are we giving 4 million plus out? What I want the government to do on our major agencies is to be competitive with the marketplace. Now I realize a senior CEO position is a significant position, but when you pay 10 times the amount that other provinces do, it's not right.
And the power is less in Quebec. Let's, as far as cost is concerned, let's go through a couple of these questions because they're really backing up, and we want to be able to give them an opportunity to ask you. So I'm going to try and keep quiet and try and get your questions in here. Sam says, a major criticism comes from polling is awareness of our leadership. How would you get people to know who you are and how you increase social media presence to compete with the left?
Well, on social media, you can follow me at Brownberry on Twitter or Patrick Brown ONT on Instagram. We do try to put out our efforts on social media. Listen, when you're in opposition, you don't get the same coverage that the government of the day
have the same microphone.
They would. But you know, maybe you get a chance to come in Brampton and talk on a town hall, and you get the word out. We're working very hard to tell Ontarians why we desperately need change, how this province is capable of so much more. I realize we have a lot of work ahead of us. But you know, my grandfather, Michael, worked till he was 94. He always told me there are no shortcuts. So every town in Ontario, every block in Ontario, every neighbor in Ontario I'm going to go to, it means I'm going to have a lot of caffeine, but I'm not worried I'm not nervous about the challenge. I'm excited for it, and I'll do my best.
There are many politicians who are afraid of town halls because the questions come up because we just read them as they go. Joseph says, are you in favor of bringing back hydro to 100% as the ownership of the people of Ontario should have?
So if I was Premier, I would stop the fire sale immediately. I wouldn't sell any further shares. I want to retain majority control. As of today, we still have majority control.
That's 60%.
Yeah, we still have,
and 30 on the gate, right?
So they've sold about 30 so far. So we still have a significant majority control.
Are we on the hook for that other 30? Is it mandatory that we as Ontarians have to lose the final 30?
No, they could stop the sale today, and there'd be no consequence. Having said that, once you've sold something, those who you've sold it for are under no obligation to sell it back. And so the NDP came out with a fantasy idea that they would force shareholders to buy it back. That's not how the market works. And so I'm hoping that I can convince Kathleen Wynne to do the right thing and not sell the remaining shares. I hope she understands there's no mandate for what she's doing. The vast majority of Ontarians are against this. She never ran on it in the last election. It's out of left field. And the worst part, it infuriates me, is she went to Ontarians and said, we're going to use this hydro money for infrastructure. And guess what? On that first 30%, they sold that $4.5 billion they got in shares. It went to one-time money. They didn't even use their infrastructure. They sold us a bill of goods that we're going to be fighting congestion, and they've done nothing with it. They one-time money to pay for their own scandals and mismanagement. And this is why Ontarians increasingly are upset with this government.
Automation is one of the things that is going to come into play. It's going to eliminate jobs. How would you, as Colin would ask, how would you, from the provincial government's standpoint, that's Kate, how would you bring manufacturing jobs back to Ontario?
So, two things here. One, innovation, technology, automation, there can be good with that too. Ontario can be part of that success. I certainly think with our high school curriculum embracing coding, enhanced computer literacy, high-tech jobs, I want Ontario to be part of that. In terms of manufacturing, I met with the Concerned Manufacturing Coalition of Ontario just actually a week or two ago, and they told me what they're concerned about is skyrocketing hydro prices and the fact the relief plan offers no help to manufacturing companies, the regulatory burden, the red tape in Ontario, which is extraordinary. They believe we can succeed in Ontario, but the challenge is right now we're becoming uncompetitive with the U.S. And what I want to do is to make sure on all those touch points that the manufacturers have expressed as major sources of Ontario disadvantages, I want to get us back to a level playing field so we can keep those manufacturing jobs in Ontario.
Jeff wants to know, what makes you think that you can fix all the corruption and mismanagement the Liberals have subjected us to over the last 14 years? Why would you want to take on a job that seems so bad? Interesting.
Well, thanks for the encouragement. I realize Ontario's hurting right now on that front. It's a government that's been under 5 OPP investigations, and a number of the criminal trials are coming forward in the fall. What I'd like to do is I think we need an accountability act in Ontario. Federally we have a Federal Accountability Act that ensures there are certain lines that aren't crossed. It's like the Wild West in Ontario right now. There's very little accountability in terms of the ethical standards at Queen's Park, and certainly this government has abused that. I would ensure we have accountability laws in place that would prevent that.
Would you charge the Wynne government with misuse of funds regarding Orange, eHealth, Hydro, etc.?
Well, it's not up for me to charge them. I'm the opposition leader. That's not done through the political process.
So if you got in, would you institute a royal commission or an investigation to look at those?
Whether there's criminal charges to be laid would be up to our police. I don't believe it's appropriate for the political actors, the political leaders at Queen's Park to intervene in a police process. Having said that, in these OPP investigations, they have laid charges. There are going to be criminal cases coming up in the fall. The Chief of Staff to the Liberal Premier, the Deputy Chief of Staff are facing criminal trials. The top fundraiser in Sudbury is facing bribery charges. This is going to be decided within our courts, and I have a lot of faith that our judicial process is fair. Our legal system is strong in Ontario, and I hope the taxpayers in Ontario will get justice.
So what's your position, this is from Owen, on Sikh motorcyclists getting a helmet exemption? Isn't there a public safety issue? And it's not even a requirement of the religion to wear, well, I don't think that's necessary. I don't agree with that. But with regards to the helmet and the Sikh turban issue, where would you sit on that?
In Manitoba, in British Columbia, in the United Kingdom, they have an exemption if you want to wear an element of an article of your faith on a motorcycle, you're allowed to. So the turban is allowed in Manitoba, it's allowed in British Columbia, it's allowed in the United Kingdom. I understand why the Sikh community is upset with Kathleen Wynne on this. When she was running for leader, she promised them that she would ensure Ontario followed that practice of other provinces. She said she supported freedom of religion as is guaranteed under the Charter. And a lot of individuals, a lot of families in the Sikh community.
So what's your position? And some people would say that if you're wearing a turban and you get involved in an accident and the medical bills, you should be responsible for them. Others said it is their right for their religion.
It may be more difficult to get insurance, but I support freedom of religion, and I believe that exemption is appropriate.
How about gas bills also? They're just so high as hydro, and I heat, and my gas is $3.50 a month. That's from Lori.
Well, the government has been so ideological in some of these issues. We saw what happened with the Green Energy Act and how it skyrocketed hydro prices under these bad contracts. I'm worried that natural gas is next. Glenn Murray, the Minister of Climate Change, made some very concerning comments. He was saying that we wanted to get rid of natural gas in Ontario within 10 years. He wanted to ban natural gas. There was even a leaked cabinet document that was in the Globe and Mail that showed it was part of their intention to immediately try to start phasing out natural gas. People can barely afford their hydro bills right now. Natural gas is one of the sources of affordable power, and so I just think I'm glad they're sort of walking that back now. But if Kathleen Wynne gets reelected, and hopefully this doesn't happen, but if the Liberals got reelected, why wouldn't they? We already saw the leaked cabinet document. Right now they're saying it's not in their immediate plans. I don't think it would be surprising if they went there down the road.
Okay, Daryl says, support the small businesses. It's a fabric of our society. They are basically 60% of the employer. The Wynne government is crippling small business through increased hydro rates and punishing tax agenda. What would be your plan to ignite and stimulate small business in this province?
So thank you for the question. I outlined 4 pillars of economic development to help small business, to help businesses of all sizes in Ontario. And that 4-pillar plan was to, 1, cut red tape to make sure that burdensome red tape, that regulatory burden that I know is the number 2 concern according to CFIB of their members. So cut red tape, going to do audit of every ministry. I'm going to make sure we have appropriate infrastructure, so product to marketplace corridors. If you're a small business, you can get your product to marketplace quickly. I'm going to make sure we have affordable hydro rates, and I'm going to address the skills mismatch to make sure we graduate young people in the areas we actually need jobs. Because right now in Ontario, we're graduating young people for professions where we don't even need people. We need to actually have the conversation, link education to employment.
In Vancouver, they put a foreign ownership tax on real estate. Real estate's going crazy. Lillian writes here that the real estate is ridiculously high in Kitchener. The average family is struggling to afford the average house. There's been talk now potentially of doing the same thing in Ontario, a vacant owner's tax or something. What's your position on that if you were given the reins of power with regards to the house prices going out of the sky?
Well, listen, anything that's going to help affordability, I'm going to have an open mind to. I think there's an affordability crisis. How a young person affords a home now in the GTA is very, very challenging. There's several issues here. I know the government's walked away. They originally floated the idea of a foreign home buyer's tax. They've walked that back. Now they're saying it's a vacant unit tax that they're considering.
Well, because they're worried about the Airbnb aspect of foreign ownership and people owning multiple units, and they're phasing out the people who want it, like Lillian in Kitchener.
Now, the Toronto Star actually, not often I quote the Toronto Star, but they had an article on the weekend mentioning that as much as we make a big issue of the vacant units, the stat that was released in the City of Toronto included everyone who is away in the winter, and included everyone who were doing home renovations and may not be in their property at the time. And so it's not as, the vacant unit may not be the silver bullet solution. I think, yes, it's good the government is looking at this and studying it, but I would also want them to look at the issue of supply. We've really diminished supply, and so we're not producing as many new single-family units that we used to. But we have more people here. We've got more demand. We've got more people looking for homes, and because of this excessive red tape, it's very difficult to get new product on the market. And so I want to look at ways to get more homes built.
Dave makes a comment, actually says, I found an old hydro bill from 2004, and Dave said he was paying 4.6 cents per kilowatt. It's gone up over 400% in 13 years. Despicable is his last comment. We keep ringing that bell for hydro. And I just want to let you folks know we're approximately at the bottom of the hour here. You can reach us at Facebook at Live Town Hall. We're speaking to Patrick Brown, the leader of the Progressive Conservatives. My name is Michael A. Charbon. We would like your comments and your questions as we roll into our last half hour. I mean, 400%. I mean, how do you justify
Well,
it?
and that's what's happened. On the watch of the Liberal government, hydro bills have gone from being competitive in Canada to a 400% increase. And right now, Kathleen Wynne's saying she's going to give some users a temporary 17% decrease by borrowing money. you created a mess. You changed you created structural problems in hydro that have made us the laughing stock of hydro policy in the province, and you want to borrow our money to give us temporary relief? Give me a break. This government is out to lunch. And what I find frustrating is that they still have the audacity to go out there and say that everything is fine. Kathleen Wynne, was saying that hydro prices just recently, a few months ago, that we're competitive. Charles Sousa, the Minister of Finance, got up in the legislature and said his hydro bill was going down. What fantasy world are they living
Well, they're
in?
talking about 25% reduction. That was the last thing that they just announced, right? And supposedly that's to take place in the summer.
Well,
is that a reality?
It's a shell game. First of all, it's not 25%. It's 17%, and it's for a few ratepayers. It's not broad-based. It's 17% is not going to help that business that's struggling. And they're borrowing your money. All they're doing to pay for these bad contracts, they're borrowing money, spread out the loan a little bit longer. But what I find infuriating is that they're proceeding with more of these bad contracts. A day after they did this big loan to pay for their past mistakes, they proceeded with 1,000 more contracts.
So some people are saying that the LCBO is up for sale. Some are saying that the OLG, they're trying to gain enough money to pay for their debts. What would you do? Is the OLG and the LCBO sacrosanct? You wouldn't touch it if you were in power, or would you?
Listen, right now I think they want to sell everything in the kitchen sink because they're broke. These are consequences of Liberal governance, and they're making choices they do not want to make. Kathleen Wynne would never have wanted to sell look at studying the LCBO or look at selling or privatizing the OLG. She's broke. And so, first of all, I think those are rumors. I'm not sure they'll actually go down that path, so I'm not going to speculate on whether that will actually happen in Ontario. Right. But I think because they're broke, they're looking at things they never looked at before, and the fire sale of Hydro One is an example.
Melissa says there's a shortage of doctors. We need to address health care. If you were elected, what would you do for health care and for nursing in Ontario?
Well, first of all, on healthcare, the way this government has disparaged physicians, I think, is unbecoming of a government. You talk about being short doctors. They just, not only have they vilified doctors and taken $700 million out of the physician contract, which really affects patient care, but they've now cut 50 medical residency positions. So every year we're going to be having less new doctors in the system, despite the fact there's more Ontarians. We're a growing province. The situation on physician shortages is going to get worse in this province. In terms of nurses, well, last year they fired 1,400 nurses. Our hospitals, we now have nurses who are working twice as hard. At some point, I think our health system is facing some real strains, and I'm worried that we're going to see more and more cracks in the system because of this incompetence. And the follow-up from that, Michael, is it's one thing to recognize a problem, but what are some of the solutions? So let me just say briefly, ALC rates are at 20%. We're caring for people in the wrong venues. We have administrative rates in healthcare that are at record heights. So they just hired 78 new healthcare VPs and created these sub-LHINs. In home care, according to the Auditor General, we spend 39% of our home care budget just on administration. I want patient care. I want dollars in healthcare going to nurses and doctors to actually care for people.
So some would say you can't deal with the volume if you don't have the people to do the work. What would you do then? How would you eliminate that but still deliver a level of care that people expect?
So the gold standard used to be 5 or 6% in administration. And so what I try to do is, rather than 39% on administration and home care, why don't we try to get to a reasonable number? If other provinces, if other areas can have administration at 5%, why do we need so many paper pushers? I don't want money in healthcare going to some fancy new VP. I want it to actually go to caring for people.
Marin wants to know, how would you protect seniors against poverty?
Well, there's a number of issues out there, and obviously you can judge a society on how you take care of your most vulnerable and your seniors. I think there's significant issues with affordability, with long-term care, with the ability to have dental care, the cuts to physiotherapy. They took $50 million out of physiotherapy. There's a number of areas where these government decisions have made life harder for the Liberals, and those are areas that I want to rectify and look at.
Ad spending. Brenda says, what about ad spending by the government in charge to promote the party? That just nails people. When you're on the radio and you hear the government in charge promoting themselves. What would be your position on that?
Well, I want to go back to the old rules. That Kathleen Wynne has run a truck through a loophole she created. She's allowing partisan ads. The Auditor General has said that it's wrong. Right now, last year they ran vanity ads on healthcare. They're cutting nurses, cutting the physician budget, and they're running ads on healthcare saying they're doing a great job. Why don't you put that money into actually caring for patients? And now, rather than offering fixes to hydro, they're going to run millions of ads on hydro, patting themselves on the back. It's wrong. Kathleen Wynne knows it's wrong, but this Liberal government is desperate. And what I'd like, I know these MPPs in Brampton, these Liberal MPPs in Brampton, they know it's wrong. They campaigned against this in 2003. I'd hope that one of these Brampton Liberal MPPs would stand up and say, I do not believe it's right that we're spending taxpayer dollars on partisan Liberal ads. I'm going to stand not with the Premier's office, but I'm going to stand with the Auditor General. Yep. That would be the right thing.
So connect with us at Facebook at Live to win Town Hall. To win. Jeez, there's a Freudian slip. That's Facebook Live at Live Town Hall with Patrick Brown. We had Pamela who said, amen about nurses. We're working twice as hard as management grows larger and bedside patients' care is being cut. Now, there is an absolute example of where the interaction, and there's someone on the front lines talking about our health care.
It's ugly out there, Michael.
It's tough. I mean, I've seen the way it is. One of the things that people say, it's always great to make promises, and it's always easy to criticize those who are in power. We still are looking, I mean, one of the previous questions, at $308 billion budget, $1 billion a month. What are some tangible solutions that you are going to institute if you're given the reins in this horse race to run this province?
Well, I don't think Ontario has a revenue problem. I think we have a spending problem. We also have a problem because we're bleeding jobs. Obviously, jobs enhance our ability to support. You have lots of jobs. You have lots of manufacturing jobs. You have lots of strong small businesses. You have the resources to support your hospitals and schools. But this government has spending left, right, and center on areas that aren't priorities.
But with all due respect, there's a lot of Ontarians that say there's not enough jobs. We're spending too much money. And that kitchen table discussion where you've got only so much money on the table and you're not doing. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with $308 billion and $1 billion a month? There's got to be something that you've got to say, we've got to stop this, or we've got to do what would be your plan? Because otherwise you're going to inherit $308 billion and say it's going to cost us something. That's just the way it is.
So I look at my grandfather, and I mentioned before, and he was a very hardworking individual. He watched his pennies. He watched his dollars. And you start watching your pennies, you're in a much better position. Right now in Ontario, we're not watching our pennies. We're not watching our dollars. We're not watching our hundreds. We're not watching our millions. And what I want to do, the approach I'm going to take to spending at Queen's Park, is that we're going to have transparency on every dollar spent. We're going to have accountability on every dollar spent. Look at the big areas. Look at infrastructure, $160 billion over 12 years. Do you think when you're building upside down bridge...
an open bidding process then? It's not going to be...
I want to, of course I want to have an open bidding process, but I also want to measure results. The fact that a company that doesn't do a job properly can get a bonus in another contract is wrong. I want to measure results.
But people are mad at the Pan Am Games, the guy getting the bonus for the Pan Am Games. Those are so flagrant financial mistakes. Are you going to change that?
Absolutely, because we have to have accountability for the taxpayer dollars we send. You look at the Sunshine List. There's people who are on the Sunshine List that there's one person who made $230,000 for working 3 months. There's not accountability for taxpayer dollars. And what I want to bring back to Queen's Park is respect for taxpayers. That every dollar we spend will be accountable, will be transparent. It's not going to be hidden. This government likes to hide their contracts, hide their waste and pork. I'm going to put it out in the open. I want there to be transparency and sunlight on how this government spends money.
Pamela says, what about the homeless people? How are you going to help the homeless people?
Well, you have to help those in need. So a number of things. One, we need a more affordable housing. We need to help our social agencies, but we also need to to create jobs. We need to have a strong economy, and so there are employment opportunities, so we can transition someone from homelessness into a stable economy.
Brenda says, what about fundraising issues? How about the Liberals and those pay-for-play unions, pastime, giving out big donations for what they're getting? And there's some people who say that they don't want their union to be able to give out that kind of money. Is there a structure or a process to start pulling back that kind of quiet funding?
So we pressured the government to clean this up. Every day we were in the legislature talking about how donations to the government seem to be linked to government contracts, how every minister was giving a fundraising quota. It was wrong, it was dirty, and the government finally, under pressure, said, okay, we're going to end corporate and union donations. That's the first step. There's still a few loopholes though. For example, a big energy company can donate staff. They can't donate money, but they can donate staff. And so we're halfway there, but I want to close those remaining loopholes.
I'm told that there's about 65 new childhood cancer diagnoses per year at the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, but there has been no increase in the oncology beds in a very long time. What is your plan with that?
We have to do better. I tour hospitals regularly. Just today I was at Sick Kids, and the hospitals have been under a 5-year freeze. There was a small 1% a portion of their budget that was released this year, but it's insignificant. Our hospitals right now, maybe the freeze helped find efficiencies in year 1 or 2, but now it's really hurting. And so I believe we need to properly fund our hospitals to do the job. It's not sustainable right now.
I had the opportunity to interview the mayor of Caledon, Mr. Thompson, and one of the biggest problems they had was connectivity. And connectivity, with wireless connectivity and phone links, is a huge thing for business. There was a question previously that talked about how can we get Ontario to be more connective, and connectivity, I should say, in Northern Ontario, and make the rates reasonable. Do you have a plan from a communication and a connectivity standpoint for business and people?
Well, I do think it's a component of being competitive. You have to have high-speed internet. You have to be able to connect at the pace that other businesses are able to connect. So just as hydro rates are important, just as red tape is important, I believe the parts of our province where there isn't connectivity, where there isn't high-speed broadband, that it's an issue. The North Simcoe Economic Development Department in the area that I represent in Simcoe County told me this is one of their biggest issues. And so I believe that our economic development strategy of Ontario can certainly include making sure that we help out to make sure every area of the province has the ability to be connected.
You're watching Town Hall Live. My name is Michael A. Charbon. We're with Patrick Brown, the leader of the Progressive Conservatives. You too can chime in with your questions and your comments at Live Town Hall. Live Town Hall. Andy wants to know, how are you going to win seats in Northern Ontario?
Well,
how are you going to win seats in Brampton?
Well, in Northern Ontario, I've been visiting regularly. I've been up there over 24 times since becoming a leader. I have to say it's really positive right now in Northern Ontario. Northern Ontario is just as frustrated with this government as you are in Brampton or Toronto. We have a by-election coming up right now in Sault Ste. Marie, and frankly, I think you're going to see the PCs do very well there, much better than we've done before. And I think there's a real opportunity to go back to the days of Bill Davis. When Bill Davis was Premier, Northern Ontario was Tory blue, and right now I believe there's a tremendous opportunity to replicate that, because it is really positive up in Northern Ontario right now. People really, really want change. They're infuriated with this government. They've let them down on the Ring of Fire. They've let them down on the forestry job losses, and it just seems that the Northern Ontario has no voice at Queen's Park.
I had the opportunity to interview Steve Paikin, who wrote a book on Bill Davis just recently, and to read some of those excerpts and what Bill Davis did for this province was huge. Tyler says, I'm a registered apprentice in Ontario, and it's extremely difficult to find other jobs and apprenticeships in any trades, whether it be in the city or rural areas or anywhere in Ontario. What can be done to increase the apprenticeship program so more people can get experiential training on the job for what they want to do?
Yeah, I want to look for opportunities and whether we need a carrot approach with business to open up some of those apprenticeship opportunities, these are good jobs. The skilled trades are good jobs. And I believe there's an area for major growth there. You talked about government advertising
Yes.
Before. I think of an actual common good for government advertising. We have a shortage in the skilled trades. Maybe that could be a TV commercial.
When I went to school, there was a 50-50 split in the summer at one point. There was a program.
Well, a lot of
with
high
the
schools don't even have shop class anymore.
Yeah, I
This
know.
government looks down on using your hands. And I have to say, I've toured parts of the province where there are great jobs in the skilled trades, making $80,000, $100,000 a year. These are good jobs.
Yep.
I'd love to see TV commercials that not only reach out and inspire that young person to consider the skilled trades, but a message to their parents that this is a worthy career that they should be proud for their children to look at.
And with automation coming in, many things are going to be replaced. It's not as much blue collar anymore. Nick says that I moved out of the province a few years ago. My question is, how is Ontario so much further behind smaller provinces such as Manitoba? That's a bit of a dig, but there is some legitimacy to his question. How are you going to get us to where we should be as Ontarians?
Well, Ontario's decline, I think, is well noted under Kathleen Wynne, whether it's the credit downgrades, whether it's being the most indebted subnational government in the world. I think one of the reasons that we've become uncompetitive, though, is hydro rates. The mess that this Liberal government has created on hydro, I think, is one of the greatest challenges we face. How do you keep jobs in this province? How do you stay prosperous when it is so much cheaper for a business to set up elsewhere? You look at the data companies that wanted to come to Ottawa but went to Montreal. You look at Xstrata in Northern Ontario that went from Timmins to Quebec. You look,
the carrot approach, to borrow your phrase, if you are elected, will you institute something that will increase companies coming to Ontario and give them a tax break? Is that the way we can make an invisible investment? Is that the carrot approach that you might entertain?
I'm going to make sure that whether it's hydro, red tape, taxation, product to marketplace, that Ontario competes and does better than adjacent provinces and states.
Pam wants to know, what do you think about the Hamilton LRT plan? I mean, there was just a whole bunch of money which was just federally that came down, and today John Tory's talking about the province's responsibility to create another relief line in Toronto. We've got a new university coming in Brampton. I mean, Mississauga's got their transit going up here, Ontario. If you were the premier of this province, what would you do to unify all of this? What kind of spending would you do? What's your projection?
So I believe the allocations the province has made on infrastructure, that commitment of $160 billion, is needed, is appropriate. I want to make sure it's spent wisely, because I worry right now when it's not being spent wisely, there'll be a lot of unfunded projects. But I'm going to add something in here. People say, do you support the LRT project, or whether it's in Brampton or Hamilton? And I sat on city council. I sat on city council for 2 terms in Barrie. Got elected 17 years ago as the youngest member of Barrie City Council at the time, and I ended up being the finance chair. And what I felt as a city councilor at the time is cities should have some autonomy, and it's up to the city council to decide what their number one infrastructure priority is. And as premier, I'd go to the mayor of Brampton or the mayor of Hamilton and say, I want to partner with you to fight gridlock. I want to partner with you to invest in infrastructure. You tell me, by a show of support on your council, what the number one priority is. And in Hamilton, the number one priority by a vote of their council is the LRT. And with that, I would work collaboratively with Hamilton. If they change their mind, they're entitled to do that. But right now, that's their clear intent, and I would respect that as premier and partner with them to make sure we can achieve that project.
What would the provincial government do about the federal government's plan to legalize marijuana for sale? That's Colin. We know that's going to probably come up, July 1st next year, I think it is. We also know that Shoppers Drug Mart is going to be the largest approved sale outlet or retailer, if you wish. Some are totally against it. Others agree, the casual use of marijuana. Others say it's absolutely mandatory for medical use and for the medical progress. Where do you sit on this debate from an Ontario perspective?
So the federal government now has a mandate for the legalization of marijuana. Like it or not, Justin Trudeau won the last election, and he has a mandate for that. And it's up to the federal parliament, and it will pass. Where I believe the province comes in is we need to make sure that once it's passed and once it becomes the law of the land, that it's implemented in a manner that's responsible.
And you get your fair piece, right? That Ontario gets the taxes from.
So the first thing I want to say, it's going to be a cost for Ontario to make sure that this new law is done in a manner that's safe, that keeps our roads safe. You know, the police associations have told me that whether it's training or new equipment, it's going to be a significant cost.
Yes.
You know, marijuana stays in the blood for 30 days, so the detection is difficult. And there are states where they've been able to adapt, but it is costly. And so what my ask, if I was Premier of Ontario, to Justin Trudeau was, you know, the federal government's going to have a windfall from this legalization. And I want to make sure Ontario has its fair share, so to make sure that our police have the tools and the resources to do their job and to make sure our streets continue to be safe.
About 15 minutes left. You're watching Town Hall Live. My name is Michael A. Charbon. We're speaking to Patrick Brown, the leader of the Progressive Conservatives. You can reach us at Live Town Hall and leave your questions. And even once we go off the air, Mr. Brown's staff will take care of your questions and you can still get them answered. So we encourage you to continue with your questions and your answers at a forum like this that allows you access to ask potential leaders of our next province what we're going to do. Colin talks about commuter town, and he's talking about Peterborough and saying that potentially Peterborough may be the next extension. Is there any interest to extend Metrolinx to Peterborough and join it into our wonderful system down here?
Well, right now I'm not a big fan of how Metrolinx has conducted themselves. And you talk about that bridge trust, and it's a start of a number of problems in Metrolinx. I don't believe we're getting appropriate accountability for taxpayer dollars. Metrolinx has an enormous budget, an enormous responsibility. I'm certainly not looking at expanding their reach until I'm convinced that every dollar that Metrolinx spends is spent wisely and appropriately. We're going to have a lot of cleanup to do at Metrolinx, frankly.
Len says we need accountability, transparency. Are you prepared to give Ontarians the open the book premise on the energy file? Are you going to stop green energy contracts? And how are you going to bring hydro relief to homes and businesses? That's a reoccurring theme. We have accountability and hydro. Are you going to show the books? Are we really going to look under the kimono and see what really is happening?
The best thing that can ever happen for government is open the books. Shine some sunlight on it. Transparency is a good thing. Transparency leads to good governance.
But you're going to have difficult times. You know as well as I do.
But you know what? Transparency keeps politicians honest. Transparency creates good governance. I want to open the books. I want to lead a transparent government. In terms of those green energy contracts, they're horrible. That's why I said earlier in the show, one of the first things I'd do if I was Premier of Ontario is I want to look at these bad contracts that Kathleen Wynne is hiding. I want to see where there's exit clauses. We have to stop signing these bad deals. We got to look at where there's exit clauses and take them. Something smells here. Of the 30 mega contracts the government signed, which are mostly foreign, the Liberal Party got $1.3 million in donations according to Elections Ontario's donation list. That's ugly. It does not pass the smell test. What is worse is they call it the Green Energy Act, but Michael, give me a break. It's not green energy. Water power is green. We're spilling water power every day in Ontario. Green Ontario water. Our water is great, and we have hydroelectric projects that are running, but we're not collecting power because we have such a surplus. Kathleen Wynne has signed expensive foreign deals, and our own green energy we're wasting. It's a travesty, it's embarrassing, and it's one of the things that I'm really eager to work on.
I attended Water Docs. I was fortunate enough to be the host to two of their films, and one of the people that they were talking about the selling of Ontario's water to large companies that are getting thousands and thousands of liters of water and putting it into plastic bottles, which is bad for our ecosystem. What would you do about that water scenario that's going on? And we know that it's in the western part of Ontario, but it's still something that you're going to have to deal with. What would you do with that?
Well, when this hit the papers, the government did promise that they were going to address this loophole. I'm going to take the government in good faith. I think it was an issue in the Wellington area.
Yes.
They
Well, it was Nestle, as a matter of fact.
Exactly. Well, I was going to mention the company, but obviously loopholes like that can't exist, and we can't see an abuse of Ontario's natural resources. The government has said they will address that loophole, and I will try to keep them honest.
Hold their feet to the fire until you get the reins. Hospitals, Pamela says, would you consider additional hospitals for Northern Ontario? They're so badly needed up here.
So one of my concerns right now in Northern Ontario is that you're seeing the government completely strangle small town hospitals. The mid-sized hospital is struggling, and I want to give proper support to our hospitals in Northern Ontario. It is ugly right now. As a guy who visits Northern Ontario regularly, there are real challenges to the hospitals in Northern Ontario, and the funding freeze there, where there isn't population growth, has been even more drastic.
The premise is generally the municipality or the county comes up with 50% and the province comes up with the other 50%, or you get a federal grant. The municipality has to come up with so much of a chunk. You can see the legitimacy of that in Brampton or Mississauga or Hamilton, where you have a large base of people where you can do that. Smaller northern towns, and I see this again as another question, smaller northern towns don't have that economic base but still need to get service. How do you wash that? How do you make that work?
Well, and it's not like they're asking for a hospital expansion. They just want to keep the hospital in the town. And you know, I was visiting the Sioux area health network there, and every year they have to cut something new. They actually had to cut the mental health services that they're offering. It's a shame, and so I want to protect our hospitals in Northern Ontario, and will provide appropriate funding to make sure that whether you live in Timmins, whether you live in Kenora, whether you live in downtown Toronto, that you have access to quality care. I think that's a premise of a strong province.
You're watching Town Hall Live. We're with Patrick Brown, the leader of the Progressive Conservatives. About 10 minutes left. Please post your questions and your comments. George has got a question. I'm tired of hearing how Wynne messed everything up. We want to know, what is your plan to turn stuff around in Ontario?
Okay. Well, I'm going to need a bit longer than 30 seconds for that.
Okay, no, that's fair. No, I'm just...
So
that's the frustration.
What I announced last year was 4 pillars of economic development that will make Ontario more competitive. And if we're more competitive in creating jobs, we can succeed. We can be a province that once again leads Confederation in job creation, in economic prosperity. So first, cut red tape. I'm going to do an audit of every ministry and cut back the 380,000 regulations we have. We will no longer be the capital red tape. Number 2, invest in infrastructure to get product to marketplace. I want to make sure that it's easier to get product to marketplace, whether it's by ship, whether it's by air, whether it's by road in the province of Ontario. 3, affordable energy prices. Deal with these offensive executive salaries, clean up these messy, bad contracts, make sure that we have affordable hydro rates in the province of Ontario. And 4, the skills mismatch. Graduate young people for jobs that exist. I want to have within our academic journey coding, computer literacy, a greater emphasis on the skilled trades. You know, last year we graduated 9,000 teachers for 5,000 teaching positions. We graduate young people for jobs that do not exist. In the areas we need jobs, according to the Chamber of Commerce, we lose over $2 billion a year for jobs that are available in Ontario, and we can't fill. We can't get a young person down that path. I want to address the skills mismatch, so that's the human resources. You fix our human resources, you fix our hydro situation, you fix the red tape challenge, and you arrange product to marketplace channels. I think Ontario can succeed.
You said that, and I quote you, school closures have a devastating impact on our communities. End quote. Quote, the Liberal government is trying to find savings on the backs of our students by putting schools on the chopping blocks. You're right. 9,000 teachers graduated for 4,000 jobs. They're talking about closing schools. There's a disconnect there.
So right now the government has 600 schools potentially on the chopping block. There seem to be closing schools every few months in a different community. At first they said it was only in areas that didn't have population growth. But the more we look at it, that's just baloney. Vaughan, they're closing a school in Vaughan. They closed a school in Barrie. Vaughan and Barrie have high growth rates. Burlington is a growing area in the GTA, and Burlington, they're closing a school in the downtown. This is the government trying to pay for their scandals, their mistakes, and they're cutting education. Who would have thought? You know, Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne said they're going to be the education premiers. Who would have thought that on their watch we'd be seeing hundreds and hundreds of schools closed?
Yes, about 5 minutes left. You're watching Town Hall Live with Patrick Brown. My name is Michael A. Charbon. Put your questions in. If your questions don't make the show, they will still address them and you'll have an opportunity to get a response back. Religious prayer, compensation for Muslims in the Ontario schools. There's still a prayer at the beginning of our Ontario legislature. There are some people that are very upset. There are others that are saying that it is their right. Where do you stand on that?
Listen, under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, we have freedom of religion, and for 20 years now in Peel, we've had religious accommodation. I know it's been a bit of a news issue lately, but it's not a new thing. And no matter what your faith is, no matter what God you worship, there should be respect for each other's faith, and I think just respecting each other is a basic tenet that should exist.
Black Lives Matter mandated that the annual Pride Parade would not have participation from Metropolitan Toronto Police. And the police now are saying if they're not allowed to go in, then there should be no funding. Others are saying that the annual Pride Parade was hijacked by a vigilante group. Where do you stand on that?
So I'm a big supporter of marriage equality, of LGBTQ rights. I marched in the last 2 Toronto Pride Parades because for me it doesn't matter who you love. The beautiful thing about Canada is that we're a home for everyone, and we treat everyone
But Black Lives Matter
equally.
stopped the parade
Yeah,
and told them that
so,
if you don't accommodate, right?
And so that's what I loved about the parade, is that it was about inclusion. And what I don't like about what Black Lives Matters has done is how can you be a parade about inclusion by preaching exclusion, to exclude our officers. And so I actually went on social media and said, this is wrong. The parade, I think, united people because it was about inclusion. And this demand by Black Lives Matters, and agreed to, unfortunately, by Pride Toronto, to exclude police is wrong. Mark Saunders, the chief of police,
Yes.
had actually gone out of his way to apologize for what happened in the early 80s when there was the bathhouse raids. You've got a chief who's been a real defender of gay rights, and then to see those officers said they're not welcome, it's wrong.
Rent control is another issue. A lot of people are saying not only house prices are skyrocketing, rent control is something that needs to be addressed. Do you have a plan for rent control in Ontario?
The whole issue of affordability is, I think, touching every field, but it's particularly acute in the city of Toronto. I think part of the issue goes back to supply too. Competition is good. I'm a big believer that competition drives competitive prices, and because we don't have new product, we don't have new supply, on the affordability of whether it's an apartment or a home, we're challenged in Ontario.
Some would say this is a watershed moment that's coming up for you. You are going to be tested as a leader of the Conservatives. You have a challenge in front of you, but you've got a lay of the land that shows, as I would say, from forum research, etc., that there are people who are looking to you to make a change. With about 2 minutes left, I want to give you an opportunity to speak to the people of Ontario and tell them what would be your plan. How would you make Ontario better as a leader, as a new party, and help this province grow and improve some of the things that we talked about tonight that average people posted and asked you about?
Well, first of all, I've enjoyed this rapid fire questions. They're not often. Normally in the legislature, I'm the one asking the questions, and now I get to answer 100 questions, and I welcome it because I want to be accountable to any concerns, any ideas. My approach at governing is this: I will be pragmatic, I will be reasonable, I will be decent. I talked about my 4-pillar plan of economic development earlier on the show, and I won't repeat myself again by outlining that, but it basically comes down to this. I want to create an environment where it's easier to operate a business, where it's easier to see jobs created, and I want to create those touch points of being competitive. I want to make sure we are slightly better, slightly more competitive, slightly more affordable than it would be in Michigan, in Manitoba, in Quebec. You look at our adjacent competitors, I want us to be better off in Ontario. The other thing I would say, Michael, is there's no monopoly on a good idea. One of the things that I've been critical at Queen's Park is it seems to be, before I got there, everything the Liberals would propose, the PCs would vote against. Anything the PCs propose, the Liberals would be against. the parties could never support each other. And my philosophy is, I don't care if it's an NDP idea, a Liberal idea, a Green Party idea. If it makes sense for Ontario, I'll support it. Stop putting on these partisan blinders. There is no monopoly on a good idea, and what's ever in the best interest in this province, I will advocate. If I was Premier of Ontario and a good idea came up from one of the opposition parties, I would embrace it. I want to be more collaborative in the style of Bill Davis, and I want to focus to make sure that this province is the strongest in Canada again, and we will not settle for being mediocre. We will not settle to be a province that has our credit downgraded. We will not settle for a province that sees 350,000 manufacturing jobs leave. I'm going to make sure I go to those manufacturing companies and I say, how can we create the conditions in which you want to be here rather than in Ohio? I want to make that pitch that we're going to keep these jobs in Ontario, and a premier that listens, a premier that's open-minded, I think can get this province back on its feet.
Well, if Vegas was going to make book on this, of 107 seats, they would say you would be the premier, the PCs would be leading, the NDP under Andrea Horwath would be the official opposition, and the Liberals would be in third place. An interesting prospect. Mr. Patrick Brown, thank you so much for being here. You've been watching Town Hall Live. I encourage you to continue posting your questions, as Mr. Brown's staff and a bunch of other folks will be able to get you some of the answers that you wish. We also invite you to go to our Facebook page. A special thank you to our team at Brampton Focus, Paul Vicente, Don McLeod, and all the other folks that are here that make this possible. My name is Michael Charbon. We thank you so much for tuning in, and we look forward to continuing with your questions and seeing you again very soon. Thanks for tuning in.